Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to this DIIS webinar. My name is Christian Fischer. I'm the director of DIIS, and it is really a sincere pleasure to have this webinar on one of the very important aspects of the conflict in Syria, and that is, of course, the situation for the Palestinian refugees. This will, of course, be seen in the context of the recent political development in the Middle East. And we have a very unique visitor today, Mr. Philippe Lazzarini, who is the Commissioner General of the UN Relief and Works Agency, the UNWA. And Mr. Lazzarini is currently visiting Denmark, who is a substantial contributor to the work of the UNWA. And we even also had a former leader of the organization, Mr. Peter Hansen. I'm sure some of you know. And we are very, very pleased to have this great opportunity to put together this webinar. A warm welcome to you, Philippe. And thank you very much indeed for giving us the opportunity to hear about your insights and your visions for the UNRWA work, and also, of course, about the challenges. I think that many of our viewers are very much aware of the many complexities of working in the Middle East region, but we are all looking very much forward to be expanding on our knowledge by learning more about the work on the UNRWA when it comes to the fundamental issues such as education and health for refugees. I will not repeat Philippe's very impressive CV. It is included in the description of the seminar at the DIIS homepage, DIIS.dk. I'll just mention that you took over, Philippe, at the steering wheel of the UNRWA in April 2020. I should also mention here, now that I have a chance to it, that is also a chance to celebrate the UN's 75th anniversary only a few days ago. Congratulations to you, Philippe, and to your organization, and to the many brave and dedicated colleagues in the UN. I know that the UNRWA was not established 75 years ago. You have a chance to celebrate in 3 years' time another 75 years anniversary. But you are part of the UN machinery, so congratulations to you and your brave and dedicated colleagues. In a minute, I will hand over to you, Philippe, but before doing so, and you will speak for about 10 minutes, but before I do so, I will just say that we also have a senior researcher at DIIS, Lars Erslev Andersen, to moderate this session here today. Lars has a very broad insight in Middle East issues. He has been a frequent visitor to the region, including also longer research stays in the region. And of course, he has published very widely on a broad range of very important issues, including refugees in the region. So just before I give you the floor, Philippe, two practical questions. You can ask questions if you use the chat function. You can ask questions during the webinar, and then Lars will, together with one of our colleagues, look into those and select a number of those. And let me also, for the sake of good order, mention that we record this and put it on the YouTube later on. So if there's details you didn't get, you have a second chance also, or even to make some PR about this event to others who may be interested in catching up later. But without further ado, Philippe, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Christian, and thank you to the Danish Institute for International Studies also for inviting me at this webinar. As you said, I'm today in Copenhagen. I'm 2 days in Copenhagen to discuss with partners and the government the support Denmark is providing to UNWA. Before commenting on some of the challenges UNWA is confronted with, and also because this webinar is focusing on the Syria crisis, let me just share one or two observations. Before I took over my function of a Commissioner General in April, I was for 5 years the resident coordinator and humanitarian coordinator of the United Nations in Lebanon. And Lebanon has been one of these countries which has opened its border to more than 1.5 million Syrian refugees in the country, while there were already Palestinian refugees in the country. Just as an observation, the presence of the Palestinian refugees has certainly dictated the way the Lebanese have dealt with the Syrian refugees in the country. And at the beginning of the crisis, I have to say the Lebanese were very much in denial. They did not want to hear about the presence of the refugees, despite the fact that they were in the country. And basically, they felt it was like a terrible nightmare, a bad dream, and they were all hoping to wake up the day after and see the refugee back. But obviously, this was a denial of reality. And the more the refugees were present, the more they had to start to deal with the situation. What I'm trying to say here is that the Lebanese never really wanted, despite their hospitality that they have shown during the entire crisis, they agreed across the political spectrum and among the population that the refugees, Syrian refugees, should not be integrated in Lebanon, and that the durable solution for the refugees should be the return in Syria. But obviously a return can take place only if there is a political solution, and in the absence of a political solution, most of the refugees did not want to go back. But part of the anxiety of the Lebanese vis-à-vis the Syrian refugees is also due to their past relation with the Palestinian refugees in country, where many associate their presence with some chapter of the civil war in Lebanon. And hence this deep anxiety, which has dictated in reality policies or the absence of any policy vis-à-vis the refugees. Now, going back to the Palestinian refugees, as you know, there are a number of Palestinian refugees who were living in Syria, who also left Syria and went to Lebanon or went to Jordan. In fact, these people were displaced for a second time. They were already refugees in the country where they were and became a second time refugees. And the same phenomena happened among the Palestinian refugees in Syria when it comes to internal displacement. Now, when we talk about the Syrian crisis, one does not really talk about Palestinian refugees. And we have to be honest, that Palestinian refugees somehow, since the beginning, dropped off the radar of concern. We know that the Syrian crisis is extremely complex and multifaceted, but no one really talks about the Palestinian refugees. I just went to Syria last week, 10 days ago, and I have to say that despite the fact that I have been in this region in and out for 30 years, and that I have seen a lot of difficult situation and human misery, I was really struck again by what I saw. I visited, for example, Yarmouk, you know, the iconic camp of Yarmouk, which has been completely destroyed. It's just rubble. And one can also see while walking there how violent this conflict has been. But what's incredible is that number of people start to return. When I arrived there, I saw a group of children who were waiting middle of the rubble, a bus to pick them up and to bring them into a school 8 kilometers from where they are. And when I asked them, what are you doing here? Why are you here? Where are you living? Basically, they were telling me that they came back because the government authorized them to go back, and because of the authorization, and since they cannot afford to pay any rent anywhere of any kind, their family and the parents decided to come back, even if it is in the rubble. And this is basically the kind of environment they are. I also visited another camp in the suburb of Damascus called Spine, and I was amazed by the level of distress, despair, and absolute depossession these people were living in. And that shows how much these people are desperately asking to be recognized as having the right to access to some dignity. And basically this is what UNWA is doing. As you know, UNWA is an organization providing basic services such as education, health, and social services to 5.6 million Palestinian refugees in the region, living in Lebanon, in Syria, in West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza and Jordan. Now, just let me update you a little bit on the situation in each of these locations. In Lebanon, the country is going through an unprecedented political crisis, unprecedented financial economic crisis. The poverty rate among the Palestinian refugees already in Lebanon was much, much higher than the average population. But today, with the current situation, the entire Lebanese population is impacted by the situation. More than 50% among them are living under the poverty line, and this rate is skyrocketing among the Palestinian refugees. And today, 80 to 90% of the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon completely rely on UNRWA assistance. Today, the level of despair, distress, I would even say hopelessness is such that people do not see how their daily life in the near future could improve. At the same time, the expectation on UNRWA's support are increasing. UNRWA for the Palestinian refugees is like a government. It's the agencies which is providing to them government-like services, which again, the school for all the children, the access to health center and hospitalization, and the same for the social safety net. Then you go to Syria. I alluded about Syria, 10 years in conflict, and this is also a country which today is hit by an unprecedented economic and financial crisis. People are daily struggling to make ends meet every month. People are struggling even to keep one meal a day for their families. And then you go to Jordan. Jordan is a country which has been badly impacted by the economic situation in the region, has also been impacted, like every country, by the COVID. And again, there, the Palestinian refugees are among the most vulnerable, and they are also relying on UNRWA support. Then we go to the West Bank and East Jerusalem. These people are all experiencing on a daily basis the impact of the occupation, settler violence, IDF incursion. But on top of that, they are also badly hit by the financial and economic situation. We have a Palestinian Authority which is almost bankrupted. Civil servants are about to lose their job. And then you go to Gaza, and Gaza is a perfect man-made humanitarian crisis where basically we have made an entire population dependent on international aid, and the international aid in Gaza is primarily UNRWA. You add on this the COVID impact, which is spreading among the Palestinian refugees, but unfortunately, they are becoming more and more reckless because what they fear the most is a pandemic of abject poverty in the region. And this is exactly what's being unleashed nowadays. And on top of that, you add the latest political development in the region, which on one hand offer new opportunities, and on the other hand, trigger some anxiety among the Palestinian refugees who have the feeling that they might not be supported anymore as they used to be by the international community, and there is a feeling that they might also be abandoned by the international community. And this is further exacerbated by the fact that they expect UNRWA to deliver more, but UNRWA is also going through unprecedented financial crisis. At the time, the donors of UNRWA are also experiencing economic and financial difficulties. So basically, Christian, I just wanted to highlight some of the challenges we are confronted with in the region. There are many more, but I was asked to stick on the 10 minutes, so I will stop here for the time being.
Hello, and thank you very much for this briefing. It is not, it is not nice briefings and not nice news, but we know that, and we know that there are a lot of problems, and the problem seems to be increasing all the time. We have the budget problems, we have the corona, we have the civil war in Syria, and so on and so forth. So it is a very, very both important, but also very challenging work that UNRWA has to do now and for years to come. And I would start by asking you about the last point you touched upon, and that is the economy of UNRWA. We know that, of course, UNRWA faced several problems concerning budget restraints, and this was not, eased by the decision of the US to degrade or to stop funding. But I hope that you can tell us that other countries have stepped in and filled in the gap, and maybe you could do a little briefing about the actual economic situation for UNRWA.
Thank you very much, Lars, for pointing at the financial difficulties the organization is confronted with. Unfortunately, it's not new. I would say that basically UNRWA is confronted with two types of problems when it comes to the financial situation. One is of a structural nature. UNRWA has a mandate to deliver education for more than 500,000 girls and boys in the region, to provide access to health to more than 3.8 million Palestinian refugees in the region, and to provide social safety net to more than 1.5 million people also in the region. The problem is that while the mandate of UNRWA is renewed with a strong political support at the General Assembly on a regular basis, this support is not necessarily materialized with matching resources. So we have a structural problem, a mismatch to start with, which is not new. But this leads to another problem, which is the constant cash flow crisis the organization is confronted with. The organization has more than 28,000 staff. We have 17,000 teachers, for example, in the region. And we never know in advance if there will be enough cash to pay the salaries at the end of the month. And this is highly unsettling for an organization delivering government-like services with a budget, core and emergency nearing the $1 billion, having so many staff and never knowing if in 2 or 3 weeks' time you will be able to pay the salaries. This is highly unsettling for the Palestinian refugees, for the staff, for the host countries, can become source of anxiety and source of instability. And it's not always the best incentive for donors because they say, well, we might not be able to fix the agency. So this needs to change. Our funding model is not sustainable per se. Right now, I am involved in a race against the clock to make sure that we find the funding between now and the end of the year. But I want to reverse also this trend and make sure that we rally member states and the donors around an agreed strategies and vision of what's being expected from UNWA to deliver, and so to have also the commitment after that from the member state that they will be supporting this. Because in this highly volatile region, UNWA can be a source of predictability. And being a source of predictability in a region like this one, that means also investing in human development and means also promoting stability and promoting an environment conducive for longer-term peace.
Yes, thank you. Maybe you also could explain for the audience a little bit about the special situation that the Palestine refugees are placed in, because they are one group of Palestine that you and your organization is taking care of, apart from all other kind of refugee, which are who are taken care of by the UNHCR. And I just wanted to ask one question, and that is, if this divide, so to say, causes any special challenges, or if that is not the case, or if you could elaborate a little bit on that, please.
Yes, thank you. You know that UNHCR and UNWA were created at the same time, but with 2 different mandates. UNHCR to deal with all the other refugees and to promote durable solution. And when we talk about durable solution, we usually have 3 possible solutions in mind. One is the return to your country of origin, the main one. Another one is integration in the country where you have fled, most of the time in neighboring countries. And the third one is the resettlement. You know, Denmark, like many other countries in Europe, are also a destination for resettlement of refugees having fled a given conflict. UNWA, which was created at the same time, did not have the mandate of promoting the durable solution, because the only durable solution at that time was a lasting political and fair solution. And UNWA was tasked, in the absence of such a political and lasting political solution, to provide these essential and basic services to the Palestinian refugees. Now, we hear regularly people saying, well, if they would be on the UNHCR, they wouldn't be refugee anymore. And this is untrue. Basically, they are refugee because they do not have a durable solution. Within UNHCR, whether you are first or second generation, if there is no durable solution for you, you are still a refugee. Go back to the Syrian crisis and see in neighboring countries. for people who are not integrated, who haven't returned, and who have not been resettled, you already have a second generation. The second generation is a refugee population. So as long you are in a situation in which you require or you are in need of protection because your status has not been addressed, you remain a refugee.
Thank you very much. I also wondered, before going to namely the impact of the Syrian crisis for the Palestinian in the region. But before that, I would ask one question, and that is when the conflict in Syria erupted and developed, a lot of refugees from Syria went to the neighboring countries, to Lebanon and to Jordan and so on, and also, of course, to Turkey. But did you, in your area, you are working in Lebanon and in Jordan, and you are also, of course, presence in Syria. But now, when they escaped or run away from Syria due to the conflict, did you face any special challenges for the Palestine refugees that coming along with the other Syrian refugees, for instance, to Lebanon or to Jordan? Did that face any special problems for the Palestine refugees from Syria?
Listen, the Palestinian refugees from Syria who fled to Lebanon or to Jordan, in reality, it was primarily in these two countries. Obviously, there have been also some in Turkey, but not in the same number. They went directly to the Palestinian refugee camp of Lebanon and Jordan, because these people were people who were registered in Syria, who were benefiting from UNWA assistance. Their kids went to the UNWA school in Syria. So basically, they went to the refugee camp in Lebanon and Jordan and registered, in fact, in the camp because they were eligible as Palestinian refugees to attend the schools and the education being provided both in Lebanon and Jordan. So basically, this group went to join. The problem is they went to join the Palestinian Lebanese living in the camp in Lebanon, living already in overcrowded camp, and this has added an additional burden in the camp, because I tell you, the camps in Lebanon are, I mean, the living conditions are particularly difficult. And I would even say that some of the camps there are among the most difficult camp to live in the entire region. But yes, these people went to join the other Palestinians, were supported by UNRWA, and did not mingle in the rest of the country with the Syrian refugees.
Yes, I remember I was visiting camps in Lebanon in 2016 and 17 and 18, and talked with some of the Palestinian Syrian refugees, and they were rather shocked coming from Yarmouk, for instance, to camps in Beirut, and see the difference if the so to say of the living conditions. So, and I guess that many of them want to go back to Syria, of course. But is that possible now? You just arrived back from Syria. You talked that the Yarmouk camp is, destroyed. But will there be a rebuild, or will there be possibilities for Palestinians who fled Syria to return to Syria? How is the situation in Yarmouk and Damascus and these areas?
You know, Yarmouk I discovered because it was the first time I was visiting Yarmouk, but it's an entire neighborhood in Damascus. It's very vast to start with. And as far as UNWA is concerned, it was not properly a camp, but it was an unofficial camp where many Palestinian refugees were living. There were up to 130,000 Palestinian refugees in Yarmouk. Now, the level of destruction is unbelievable. It is completely flattened down. Now, despite that, despite all this rubble, you have a number of families who recently started to come back to Yarmouk. And they go back with their children. They go back with all their relatives. And and our position has always been clear. We will not rehabilitate in the absence of people being back, but if the people are back, we will look at how to restore some of the services. And this is exactly what we have done in Spinning. Now, in Yarmouk, and I think number one, people going back have no choice. They go back because basically they have to choose between two impossible situations, and it's economically driven. So we are really talking about people living in distress and abject poverty. Once they are back in Yarmouk, they are asking, where can my kid go back to school? Can somebody provide access to health services? As UNWA, what we are doing now is we provide the transportation to go to the school. We provide mobile clinic. But the more people are going back, the more we will be looking at how to rehabilitate some of our services to better support the people we're supposed to support. Now, I also know it's a difficult discussion in general when we talk about rehabilitation or development in Syria, because in the absence of a political solution, no one is really willing to be involved in longer-term development. This is an ongoing or non-ongoing discussion for some times. But when it comes to the Palestinian refugees, we are talking about a different issue. We are talking about people for whom an agency has been created to provide these services. And I do believe that the discussion in the future about how to rehabilitate and resume the services to the Palestinian refugees in Syria should take place out of the broader political context where the discussion about future development and how far can we go is taking place.
Oh, thank you very much. This is a very interesting and useful information. I will now ask about Jordan. Jordan has been facing severe problems, of course, like all other countries in the region. So how would you characterize the situation for the Palestinian refugees in Jordan? How are they affected by the Syrian crisis? And how did UNWA in Jordan manage to, so to say, provide services for the people coming from Syria?
Yeah, Jordan, like Lebanon, is one of the two countries which received the highest number of Palestinian Syrians from Syria. And basically, the Palestinian refugees from Syria in Jordan, like in Lebanon, went to join primarily the camps in Jordan. The only difference when you look at the camp is that the living conditions in the camp in Jordan are better than the one in Lebanon. But having said that, it's still putting a strain on the Jordanian Palestinian refugee population, and is also putting a strain on the services we are providing in Jordan. Beside that, Jordan is also one of the countries which has been harshly impacted by the number of conflicts in the region. I think it started already with Iraq in the past, then directly with Syria, and we have also, Jordan is also a country which, like all the other countries in the region, which have been severely impacted by the socio-economic impact of the COVID. As you know, there have been a long lockdown also to prevent the spread, especially at the time of the first wave, which has almost, which has completely slowed down the economy. And basically, like in every country, the most affected by the economic impact are the most vulnerable. And in Jordan, the Palestinian refugees are also among the most vulnerable. So there have been a socio-economic strain on them without any doubt.
Sure, thank you. In Lebanon and maybe also in Jordan, I wanted to hear if you experience any so-called or so to say tensions between the refugees, Palestinian refugees that used to live in Jordan and Lebanon, and the incoming Palestinian refugees from Syria. I think in the beginning they were very welcome, but taken care of. But also, as everybody are under stress, and so maybe some changes took place. I don't know about it.
I think you're right to flag this issue. At the beginning, they were very welcoming. And, you know, at the beginning of the Syrian crisis, there have been also a lot of resources which have been mobilized to support people directly impacted by the Syrian crisis. So like the Syrian refugees who arrived in Lebanon, the Palestinian Syrian refugees in Lebanon were also benefiting from targeted assistance. But as you said, during the time, the differentiation in terms of assistance is less and less accepted by the host community, in that case, the Palestinian Lebanese refugees, who say, but we are exactly in the same type of dire need, at least socio-economically. Why should you do a differentiation in terms of support? At the beginning, we understand because of the lack of shelter and they were displaced, but after 10 years, why should you continue to make a difference? And I have to say that this is the reason why we are now looking at providing the same assistance both to Palestinian refugees from Lebanon and Palestinian refugees from Syria living in the same Palestinian camp or living in the same neighborhood. Because if we would have continued to differentiate, we would certainly have contributed to fuel possible tension.
Turning now to Gaza, we could also turn to West Bank, but now I would spend a question on Gaza. Gaza situation, humanitarian situation is, as I guess everybody know, very, very, almost catastrophic. I mean, with a lot of problems in environment, concerning water supply, concerning housing, and a lot of other things. It's very many people living in a very little space, so to say. And there is also the blockade. So I think, and now we also heard that that there has been also COVID-19 eruption in Gaza. And I mean, half of the population, they are children. I mean, they are people below 18. So we have almost 1 million children living there under these conditions. So it must be a huge, tremendous challenge to provide services to under these conditions. And how are you able to do that? And how are you succeeding, so to say?
And in Gaza, UNWA is the main provider because the majority of the population are refugees, and the situation is dire today for everybody. And so everybody today relies on humanitarian assistance. But Gaza, it's unfortunately an artificial crisis. It's a man-made crisis. We are talking, I was already based, I have been twice in Gaza, once in 1990 at the time of the first Intifada. I went back in between 2008, 2010. It's a crisis of human dignity, what's going on in Gaza. We have made an entire population relying on international humanitarian welfare. That's what we are talking about. Now, challenges are huge. When COVID started, it was a nightmare for us, the idea that COVID might reach Gaza, might spread in Gaza, because we perfectly know that the health system is not adapted, is not adjusted, cannot deal with a situation like this one. Gaza is a place where you have just a couple of hours of electricity. If you visit the electricity plant, you would see that they are sometimes functioning on a car battery for the population in Gaza. The water, we keep hearing that soon there will be no drinkable water available in Gaza, and that already the aquifer is contaminated. So you just name it, it's part of the challenge. And on top of that, people live completely constrained in a very small territory without real possibility to move beyond that. So that's the reason why I do believe that Gaza is primarily a dignity crisis, which needs to be addressed that way. Meanwhile, as UNWA, the main provider of services, the main employer also in the Gaza Strip, we year after year, because of the growing population you were mentioning, our program are also increasing. Today, the bulk of the girls and boys attending UNWA schools are from Gaza. We have 530,000 girls and boys in all our schools. More than 280,000 are in Gaza, and the number are increasing.
Yeah, it's huge. And before now going to take some questions from the audience, there have been people addressing some questions, and I will turn to them very soon. I would just ask a question which is, I mean, a bit difficult, and that is, how do you see the possibilities for a more durable solution to the Palestinian crisis? I mean, we have seen so many attempts of trying to do a kind of durable solution, and the latest one was the Trump, so to say, plan from January. And I can say personally, I don't believe in it, but this is one way of addressing it. And we have then seen now that Arab states, they are, taking a new approach with the so-called normalization with Israel and these things. So how do you see the possibilities or the, for a better future for the Palestinians, so to say?
You know, for 70 years, the international community is looking for a fair and durable political solution. And as far the United Nations is concerned, we stick on the UN resolution on the international law and the two-state solution along the 67 line. Now, having said that, it is true that there have been number of new development ongoing initiative, which on one hand trigger hope that maybe by handling or dealing in a different way and creating solution, it will encourage a restart of negotiation. But on the other hand, it also triggering some anxiety, part of the anxiety being, and this is what we hear in the region, that things could go on without a solution. The problem is you cannot solve a problem without a solution just by denying its existence or saying it doesn't exist anymore. So I don't have the answer today. I think for the time being, there are, commitment from the international community, which has not been met yet after 70 years. But it's not because it has been so difficult until today that it would justify that we do not do the extra mile to achieve a lasting peace for equitable and fair for everybody.
Thank you very much. I'll now turn to the questions from the audience. And the first question is from Yazid Sahda, and it is about UNWA and the credibility of UNWA. And the question is referring to the report that came out in 2019 and was very much exposed on Al Jazeera, so to say, about some mismanagement in the UNWA organization. And it was not while you were Commissioner General, but on the former. But that is the question is how do you see the future of building up credibility of UNWA, because that is also of course important. Beside of the important work, then it's also important to have a solid credibility in order to have the funding from the UN member states.
I have to say that this management came at a very difficult time for UNRWA, because it came at a time of an unprecedented financial crisis. There was a US defunding in 2018. At the same year, there have been an expression of solidarity of the international community, and just after, you had this management crisis. The good thing today is that I do believe the credibility has been rebuilt, the confidence has been restored between member state and the organization. Number of internal investigations have taken place. Decisions based on the outcome have been taken. There is a new management within the organization. There haven't been, and the Secretary General has been very clear, within this management crisis, there haven't been any financial fraud. And since number of initiatives have been put in place within the organization to reinforce internal oversight bodies, to reinforce the transparency, the decision-making, the recruitment process, and the feedback I am getting today from the member state is that we trust what has been implemented. The page is turned. The organization needs to be now forward-looking and not backward-looking when it comes to this crisis.
Yeah, I guess at the UN General Assembly, where the mandate was renewed, there was a very, very vast majority of member state support, so to say. Well, I will take the next question, and I will just read it. I think you already touched upon it, but let's have it one more time then. It says it's a question from Palestine Ismail, and it is following the normalization between Israel and some Arab countries. Will there be a change in the strategy for supporting Palestinian refugees by UNWA and the international community? Is there a long-term strategy? That is the question.
Yeah, listen, UNRWA needs a strategy. There is absolutely no doubt. So traditionally, there have been multi-year strategies being developed within the organization, being presented to member states. Now, again, I do believe that in a period of COVID or post-COVID, when we have seen the impact on the Palestinian refugees, but also taking into consideration, the reality of the world we are living in, it is also important to look at the way we are delivering on our mandate. Now, for example, when it comes to education, how do we adjust to possible new needs in the future? Education and digitalization. People have not been equal when it comes to the impact of the COVID. We might be equal when we take the risk of being infected, but not when it comes to its impact. And I think education is a very good example. You do not have access to the same quality education when you live in an overcrowded camp. You have to work from home. You do not have a device for all the children. The parents are struggling to make end meet and do not necessarily prioritize the device or the access to connectivity. So we need to draw the lesson and to look at how do we make sure that we continue to promote the right of the Palestinian refugees by providing access to education, health, and social safety net, but taking into consideration the time we are living in. Today, when we have for example, the broader Agenda 2030 or the Sustainable Development Goal, the most ambitious ever anti-poverty program adopted by the international community, we have access to universal healthcare. What does it mean for the Palestinian refugees and for UNRWA to ensure that they have access to universal healthcare? Is it through delivering services the way we have done over the last 60, 70 years, or should we complete it by a different way to do business? I indicated before that this pandemic and the economic crisis has unleashed a pandemic of abject poverty. Maybe we will not be able to address the abject poverty by continuing to provide year after year only food assistance or cash assistance if this is not completed by microcredit, completed by linking microcredit to a type of professional training, taking into consideration the new digital environment in which we are evolving. So I do believe indeed that while remaining firmly focused on our core mandate, we can look at doing business in a different way, seeking each time the interest of the Palestinian refugees and seeking lasting impact.
Thank you. I take this question from Laila Andre, and we also, or you touched upon it before, but I mean, it is an important question because I think many people, they are a little bit confused about it. So I will just read the question, and it says, did the UNRWA collaborate with the international community. Sorry, now it disappeared. Providing aid to Syrian refugees in the main hosting countries. In Lebanon, for example, are the Palestinians for Syria being targeted by UNWA or by UN-led 3RP plan for Syrian refugees? I think we talked about it, but maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on it.
The question is whether Palestinian refugees are included in the 3RP, correct?
Yeah.
They have been only in Lebanon and in Jordan, because the 3RP tackles the regional approach of the Syrian crisis and primarily takes into consideration appeals for Syria, for Jordan, and for Lebanon, and Syria from within Syria, or in the past also from the Turkish border. So there have been elements mainly addressing the specific need of the Palestinian from Syria in Lebanon and Jordan who have been integrated in the 3RP. But I would say that number one, it has been, based on my past experience of a resident coordinator, it has been marginal, and UNWA each time has to make sure that this component be also part of the 3RP. And this comes back to the comment I made before, that when we are addressing the Syrian crisis, we tend to drop off the table the fate of the Palestinian refugees who have also paid a high price and have been severely impacted by the Syrian crisis.
Thank you very much. I think you have provided us with very to the point answers to the different questions posed both by me and by people from the audience. So I think I will ask you for if you have some last comment you want to address before we close this webinar.
No, thank you. Listen, it continues for us to be a race against the clock to maintain all our services. Today, the main priority of UNWA is to make sure that we meet end between now and the end of the year. So there is still an important shortfall. And then I hope that in the future, we will be able once for all to address the funding model, and so that we can continue to focus on longer term strategies. And I think as the last comment, there was a question about the impact of the ongoing normalization in the region. This is something we are also looking at, normalization on one hand, but making sure also that the attention and the support on the Palestinian refugees remain until the day, in fact, we have a proper, lasting and fair solution for them. So thank you very much for hosting me today. And I hope we will be able to continue this conversation at a different time.
Yeah, I hope so. And thank you very much for your valuable comments. And thank you for joining. So I just want to say that we are happy that you follow this webinar, and that you can follow our webpage and see if there are other webinars and events that you want to look into. Thank you very much for today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.